Hi, my name's Emma and let's talk spooky stuff. Welcome back. Before you jump to conclusions, this video is not what you think. 2012 horror Sinister suffers from a strange affliction. There's a divide among horror fans if this film is the scariest film they've ever seen, or if some aspects allow it to fall flat. Like poor Tim Carpenter in Final Destination 2. Ouch. I spoke to some of you on social media who reiterated your takeaway that the found footage moments in the film are complete nightmare fuel, but the ebbs and flows connecting the story somehow turn one of the most sinister horror villains, Bagul, into the typical Boogie monster. The film changes this pagan deity who feeds on children's souls into a character referred to as Mr. Boogie. Sinister has a different feel to a lot of horrors in this decade. It's grittier, it's darker, literally. But did it push these elements of scare over the edge too far that they become unscary? Instead of towing the line of terrifying, does it push it to the extreme, which counteracts its balance? Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. I promise I will explain, but first let's tackle the basics. And yes, this video will have spoilers for the 2012 film Sinister, but I will not be talking about the sequel really at all, so we're just gonna focus on this main story, so keep that in mind. I'm trying to stay focused here. Sinister is the 2012 horror film that follows protagonist, true crime writer Allison Oswalt, played by Ethan Hawke, and of course his family as well. Oswalt is known for causing controversies with his journalism and is looking for the next story that will put him back on the map and potentially destroy his family. Yes, harsh but true. This guy is not well liked and isn't afraid to get his hands dirty. Cue the opening scene where he moves his family into a murder house without their knowledge. This murder is the topic of his next book. He'll do anything for a story, including lying to his wife that they aren't living next door to the murder house because in fact they're inside.
We didn't move in a few houses down from a crime scene again, did we?
Tracy.
No, just don't say anything. If we did, I don't want to know about it.
We didn't.
You promise?
I promise.
Oswalt begins his research into the gruesome murder that took place in the home and the missing victim, a little girl, but uncovers potential gold when he finds a box in the attic he believes belongs to the previous owners. Inside is a series of home movies that are literal snuff, showing horrendous murders, each displaying a glimpse of Mr. Boogie, but we will get to him very soon. Oswalt then works with an awkward deputy known as Deputy. Yes, I know he's in the second film, but in this film he is known as Deputy so-and-so.
You know, I could be like, you know, your deputy so-and-so.
Which of course plays into the whole fact of someone giving credit in a book to someone who helped them crack a case, and in this case he doesn't get a name. Very funny. It actually is quite funny. But anyway, Oswalt and him begin to connect the tapes to real-life crimes, as well as a child disappearing after each tragedy. Deputy so-and-so leads Oswalt to meet an occult specialist professor who deciphers the images of Bagul, revealing its hunger for souls and how he is able to use images to transport through realms. Oswalt decides to finally leave the house to protect his children, but unwittingly continues the pattern by moving out of the last murder location. Deputy so-and-so calls him at his new location to inform him that there is a pattern linking the families moving house to house. But it's too late. Bagul has possessed his daughter through his actions of watching the tapes. He has opened the portal to his realm and now completing the chain by moving. The reveal of the children being the killers is seen before it becomes apparent that his tea has been spiked by his daughter, and he's ultimately slaughtered along with the rest of his family. A Blumhouse Productions roaming shot is seen, and his daughter draws him a lovely souvenir before following Bagul and the other murderous children into the movie. Sinister was inspired by a nightmare Robert Cargill had after watching the film The Ring, which is where the movie of course gets its cursed film aspect. Cargill, who started his career as a film critic, co-wrote the film with director Scott Derrickson. Side note, the gang is getting back together with Ethan Hawke talk for the film coming this year, The Black Phone. I'm very excited to see that one. Sinister is a dark film, mostly shot at night and utilizing shadows, and its ominous soundtrack composed by Christopher Young. This was the artist's first synth sound design bass score. I would describe the soundscape as all of the noises you think you hear in the middle of the night when you're paranoid. Add the howling of the wind and some demonic undertones, and that's basically it. Played along with the silent Super 8 films, it's the work of nightmares. Norwegian black metal was also sampled for some of the background tracks. Okay, now we have handled the basics, let's get into the nitty-gritty. I want to explain to you why I think Sinister went too far. Basically, like most horror films, they work when people get cast under their spell. But not every film works for everyone, and sometimes with a scare comes an opposite reaction. With every positively terrifying aspect in this film, I feel like in an attempt to push these boundaries, it oversteps its territory into what could be perceived as a negative, breaking the spell and taking the viewer out of the film. Because sometimes less is more. Before you rage down in those comments, I do have some great examples of exactly what I mean. I think that these show how the great scary aspects in the film have been pushed past their breaking point, diminishing the positive aspects created. We have creepy stylization, Oswalt, and of course, Mr. Oogie Boogie. Let's start with stylization. As mentioned, the film is made up of segments of Super 8 home movies. The stylization of these segments are what viewers find unnerving. Grainy footage which we are forced to watch with Oswalt alone in his attic. The atmosphere of these viewings adds to the mystery on the tapes, and the content itself is horrendous. It's the death of entire families in bizarre, creative ways, torture up close. We witness them watching on helplessly as the camera's light reflects the terror in their eyes. Add the demonic soundtrack, it's really unnerving stuff. Especially the lawnmower kill, I mean, that is one of the most epic jump scares I've ever seen. So disturbing. But what counteracts this is just a few small aspects added to these scenes and throughout the film that counteracts the terror that they have created. Creepy kids can be done well, but they can also be seen as cliche, and there's nothing more cliche than a kid's violent drawing. An aspect that adds literally nothing to the film. Yes, Bagul can come through in images, but that is what the footage is for. We don't need these drawings to be added to the mix. Less is more. The images created by the children are for effect, and for me, they cheapen the film. But far worse for me is the shh aspect. Sure, the kids are making this gesture because they're keeping the secret of the boogeyman, but do they need to sign off every scene with this? It's just overkill. It upsets the simple stylization that builds the tension and leaves the audience waiting for a jump scare. Instead, we have the children staring directly into the lens, which creates the idea that they are self-aware of the situation, not entirely possessed or acting like a vessel for Mr. Boogeyman. Add in some jump scares throughout the film of dead kids with dramatic makeup. It's a bizarre addition to everything that's been built, cutting the tension and mystery off at the knees. I mean, how do you go from lawnmower terror to this? I would love to hear your thoughts on these aspects and what parts you actually found scary down below in the comments. I can't wait to read them. But next, let's talk about Oswalt. I need to show you the next example by showing you where they went too far with this aspect to explain the true intentions. A common thing that came up when I was recently watching this film with my Patreons, linked down below, was the fact that Ethan Hawke's character is so unlikable to the point that you just don't care what happens to him. He had it coming. I'm sure you picked this up with my basic breakdown of the film. He is selfish with little redeeming qualities. We also learn from his conversation with the sheriff when moving in that his writing has done more than offend. It's actually affected cases directly where a killer has walked free because of his theories.
Your bad theory helped a killer go free. You ruin people's lives.
Now he's moving his family into a home where they don't want to live. They are entirely at the end of their ropes. Sorry, probably not the right wording with this film, but you know what I mean. His wife even threatened to leave if it didn't go well.
If this goes sour, like last time, I'll take Trevor and Ashley and go back home to my sisters.
His son expresses that he is teased for his dad's actions.
Kids all hate me again and tell me non-stop about what happened.
And his daughter complains that she doesn't want to move there. His response is he doesn't want to write books that will pay for the house that she loves. Instead, he wants to move his family into a murder house for his own selfish gain.
Why couldn't you just keep writing in the old house?
Because I was gonna have to write college textbooks to pay for that old house. And I can't do that.
Why not?
Because I just can't.
And don't get me wrong, I do understand that it is important to follow everyone's dreams. Trust me. Trust me. But this crosses the line. Not only is everyone changing their whole lives for his dreams, he's also lying to them.
Do you understand what you've done this time? The kind of jeopardy you've put your children in?
Worst thing that has ever happened to her is one time she moved into a house where a family was killed. She found out about the murders, all right? So she felt sorry for the little girl, so she painted a picture.
Besides all of these actions, what would you do when you find potential evidence for a murder case where someone is still missing, a little girl? Do you A, call the police, B, tell your family, or C, keep it to yourself and watch every snuff film? If you answered C, you may be an unlikable character in a horror movie. But you may be surprised to learn that this is actually the film's intention. They wanted him to be an asshole in a way. They just went too far. In fact, his whole character is a layer of fear that some of us missed. We as the audience groan over Oswalt sacrificing his family, making mistake after mistake, and as we've said, he's an extremely unlikable protagonist, which breaks the care factor for some viewers. But what if I told you this was purposely done? This is the perspective of a man who is willing to do anything for a story and put himself and his family in danger. This is actually the fears of the writer and director who worked this into the storyline. Both men are married with families and have careers based on finding and creating a story. So, Oswalt is their greatest fear, becoming a man who does not know when to stop and sacrifices everything he loves. It's the obsession that worries them. Oswalt is unlikable to serve a purpose, but for some viewers, this makes him unwatchable, or at least it makes it hard to connect to him as a character and to care about any of the consequences to his decisions. Because as we see in the film, he's actually self-aware of what he's doing.
So ultimately, what feels better, seeing justice done or seeing your book, Kentucky Blood, #1 on the New York Times bestseller list?
The justice. No, without question.
Again, this film toes a line with the fear, but it overstepped and broke the balance for some viewers, especially those who cannot relate to the drive for a story that may destroy his whole family. And it would have been different if he was redeemable in some way, but he's just not. I feel like they took the character a little bit too far. Instead of making him a guy who got obsessed with one story, from the jump, he's been destroying lives. It's really hard to like him. I just needed one redeeming quality. Is that so much to ask for? Which brings us to our last too far. Bagul, the Oogie Boogeyman. Bagul is first known as the Boogeyman, as we see this in the children's drawing. He gets a few appearances before we discover the damning lore of his character. Professor Jonas, the occultist specialist, explains to us that Bagul is a pagan deity known as the Eater of Children. Bagul needs the souls of human children to survive. He tricks and traps the children when they consume his images, and in this case, it's the footage, bringing them into his netherworld so he can feed off them slowly. Spooky stuff, right? And I joke about the boogeyman, but this is actually the idea of where this villain came from. It is meant to be a new take on the boogeyman. But in my mind, he acts more like the Pied Piper, because Cargill was looking for an entity that would be both terrifying and seductive to children, luring them to their death. When creating the look for Bagul, Cargill worked off the concept of an evil Willy Wonka, but he was torn on his idea because he knew if he didn't get it right, it might be a little bit comedic. Interesting enough, he searched for the look for this entity by going through Flickr, a photo sharing platform. He said he went through hundreds of thousands of images and found one called Natalie, in which he paid for the copyright too, and this became the basis for his design. He also incorporated the idea of black metal costuming into the look, since the symbols discussed with the expert led back to pagan traditions. Obviously, a lot of thought went into Bagul. His lore is both thoughtful and dark. But as we've spoken about, less is more, and sometimes in a dark film, revealing the creature or entity over and over again kind of ruins the mystery. This is something I noticed when I asked you about it on socials. People said to me that Bagul had too much screen time. For me, the idea that the children don't understand who he is chilling, and the fact they call him a boogeyman, it makes sense. That's a normal thing in horror movies, to be honest. But the more we see him, the more he comes to life and the less of a mysterious figure he is. We can see his movements and mannerisms as he becomes more human, less like a dainty and more of a child version of the boogeyman. He had such a strong and focused background and lore, and somehow it was hijacked, and now he represents all evil. His mystery fading away with every screen appearance. We find time and time again in horror movies with reveals and creatures and entities. Sometimes less is more. I know it depends on the film and the way it is shown, but the whole idea of this film is he's only getting these small snapshots of this footage and isn't able to see the bigger picture, and I feel like this should be the same for the entity. Should Bagul have been left in the shadows, more of a mystery, or did you prefer to see him transform into some human structure? For me, this crossed the line of intriguing darkness and became overstated evil. It went too far. We need to talk quickly about the ending because this is another thing that came up time and time again. People said that it was too quick and just downright silly. I mean, the shush gesture is in full effect, but ultimately people felt that they were unsatisfied with the way it all came to an end. While I agree, this feeds into Oswalt's character. Doomed from the start, and once all is revealed, there's really not too much more they could have done with this film. And I'm gonna go against the grain and say perhaps even more of an ambiguous ending was probably needed. But this would have needed the element of mystery to be kept alive. With this all said, obviously we dig deep because we care. We are obsessed with horror, and don't get me wrong, Ethan Hawke in this film was amazing. His cardigan, love it. Where can I buy it? And I can't wait to see him back with the rest of this team in The Black Phone this year. But honestly, every time I watch Sinister, I change my rating. There's always been something that I could not put my finger on, and now I feel like I found it. The film just went too far with these really interesting and beyond all scary aspects. In trying to push boundaries, in which they did, especially with the lawnmower, they pushed things too far over the line that it counteracted its balance. Do you think less is more? I can't wait to hear what you think about Sinister. My name is Emma. I do 2 videos every single week, doing deep dives like this and giving you a lot of recommendations. If you'd like to subscribe, I'd love to have you here. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and I'll talk to you very soon. Stay safe and stay spooky. Bye, friends.